I've been a vocal Final Fantasy hater. Not for recreational purposes, although I do some of that too. It's because despite me wanting so bad to love the games, since I love the aesthetic, it never clicks. Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy 15, and Final Fantasy 16. I played all these games and finished none of them. I've disliked them all for a different reason, meaning each story was boring and unfulfilling in its own unique way. But when it comes to Final Fantasy 16, yes, I enjoyed the music, the combat was really fun, and I was a big fan of the voice acting.
Morn, I found him with his nose buried in my nuts.
But when interacting with the story of a grand adventure story game becomes a burden, then I no longer want to play the game. That's why I'm here in the first place. Is the story falling short that big of a deal? Yes, I think it is, because even though it's a game, first and foremost, and the gameplay is good, we're talking about like a 40-60 split in terms of gameplay and story/dialogue, in favor of dialogue. And yeah, you can skip the cutscenes, but then why are you playing the game in the first place? I understand how it can be seen as a trivial thing, but I don't care. I didn't say it was a bad game, just said it was mediocre and disappointing, all things considered, especially with how strong it started. To see it fizzle out so hard and become uninteresting was annoying, to say the least. I'd also like to add that one of the YouTubers I follow, Tosker, actually convinced me to get this game because he's a self-proclaimed Final Fantasy fan, and he was talking about how excited he was for 16, going through all the news he had heard about the game. I didn't really know much about it, so I was like, all right, maybe this will be a game for me. He deleted the video talking about how excited he was for the game after it released. And I've had so many conversations with people saying I'm so harsh on 16, but if that nigga deleted his video because the game was so mid, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. However, when it comes to Final Fantasy VII, and more specifically Final Fantasy VII Remake, it actually wasn't the story that turned me away. The reason I didn't like the original Final Fantasy VII is because I played it on an emulator far after it came out, so it just felt outdated and wasn't as enjoyable. Not all games are timeless. I also have a huge bias against turn-based games, despite me shouting from the mountaintops that Persona 5 is the greatest game of all time. So when I heard that the Final Fantasy VII Remake was coming out back then, and it didn't have turn-based combat, switches up the story to be fresh, even though I didn't remember anything about the story in the first place, and it's one of the best-looking games to ever come out, I thought it was a match made in heaven. But then I played it. It was the most boring, monotonous, and tedious thing I've ever experienced. And this was during a time where I believed you need to play a game for hours and hours and hours to have a valid opinion on it. So I forced myself to play 20 hours of a game I wasn't enjoying, making me hate it even more. And after playing Final Fantasy VII Remake and 16 and not vibing with either, I concluded that Final Fantasy just wasn't for me, until I remembered the words of another chocolate-colored YouTuber.
I've heard people calling the game hack and slashy with damage sponges for enemies, and while you can certainly play it like that, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot. As with any good combat system, it's ultimately what you make of it. You can power through ignoring weaknesses and only using the most basic moves, sure, but you'll encounter a lot more resistance from the game and probably have less fun than if you were to fully interact with all of the mechanics the game offers you.
And that's exactly what I was doing. So, since the continuation of the 7 Remake is coming out in a few months, I decided to give the game another go and see if it was just user error, and now I feel like an idiot.
Just who do you think you are?
A law-abiding concerned citizen.
Law-abiding? Really?
100% racism and has nothing to do with the gun strapped to his arm. While I am an idiot, I make YouTube videos, I also think that the tutorial for this game assumes a bit too much of the player, which is crazy that I'm even saying, because I fucking hate tutorials. And one of the most amazing things about Final Fantasy VII Remake is that it assumes the player has a base level of intelligence. It doesn't baby you, it tells you something once, then never again. They don't bother you and constantly remind you of basic things that you should already know. A good example of this is this sequence right here. The game tells you to move the sticks for the letters, and that's it. The game then shows you on the screen of the console that Tifa's looking at which direction to pull the sticks in, and tells you when you need to pull them based on dialogue in the game, instead of pulling you to the side and giving you a pep talk, going in depth about the history of levers. But this assumption of knowledge is taken to an entirely different level when it comes to the combat. Now, switching between characters in the game isn't a foreign concept, and I've played games where switching between characters is normal. However, in this game's case, I feel like it's too easy to fall into the assumption that switching between characters is an optional choice. And if you think that's stupid, and I know it sounds stupid, then why did every video I watched on this game talking about its combat system, and just the game in general, feel it was necessary to bring up? It seems so stupid and obvious if you know, but but it's so easy to get caught in one way of thinking. It's like those times when you're doing a puzzle and the answer is staring at you right in your face. Then someone comes over and they're like, dude, this is so easy. Just move this piece right here. But when you're in the moment, it just doesn't click. Obviously, switching characters will give you an advantage, but how frequently you're switching and the intention of your switch is the difference between a 5-minute fight and a 50-minute fight. When I fought this fucking house, the first time I played, it took me over an hour, and I am not kidding. But in my current playthrough, it took me 15 minutes. The more you switch characters and the more intentional you are with your actions, when you switch characters, string combos together, faster you'll defeat the enemy. Such a simple seeming concept in retrospect. But hindsight is 2020. Another huge aspect of the combat that the game is kind of hush-hush about is the status elements. The very first time you're inflicted with the status element, the game is like, be careful not to get inflicted with status elements, and that's all you ever hear about it. They don't tell you what kind of status elements there are. They don't tell you about the buffs either. I don't even remember if they tell you what you can do to get rid of them. The only way you can get this information from the game itself is by searching through this big ass menu for the page with the debuffs and the page for the buffs. And you really gotta study this page because when you're in combat, the game only shows you the symbol for the status effect. So if you forgot what the symbol means, you gotta reopen the menu, go back to C, or scroll through every item in your inventory until you chance buy the one that lets you use it. It's the small things like this that are left unsaid that may or may not impact a player's experiences negatively and make the fights last longer than they need to, especially if a player isn't really accustomed to playing RPGs. And it's not like this is just a normal ordinary RPG either. The ATB system in this game is relatively unique, so unlike a shooter or basic turn-based RPG, I think it could do with a little more explanation. Of course, this all could have been avoided if I looked into this information online, like I ended up doing anyway, and it's not necessarily the developer's fault, but looking up any information about a story game, no matter how small, is dangerous territory. Because Google fucking hates you, and searching a game's name is a roulette if you're gonna see X character's death autofilled. Now, on my second playthrough with this knowledge, I'm enjoying the game so much more. Like, it feels rewarding. I'm absolutely thrashing a boss's health bar. And it's not just the gameplay that got better either. The story is also more enjoyable. I played this game before, but it feels like I'm experiencing it for the first time. Like, thinking back, I was so upset and moody about the combat that I wasn't really paying attention to the story. It's so easy to get caught up in the negative and miss all the amazing experiences something has to offer. And there's so much to love about this game that I was blind on the first playthrough. There's so many goofy side NPC reactions that you can listen in on. And the narrative is just so varied. 1 minute, you're in an intense terrorist operation. Then you're hitting a lick on a dude in a coma. Then you're doing a magic mic routine. It's crazy that this is a main story mission. There's so much in this game to appreciate, and not only is the side content so varied, but the content of the main story are as well. Solid gameplay, solid mini games. I mean, it has fucking darts, and it has a beyond solid story. Besides whatever the fuck is going on with these ghost things. This truly was an instance of hate the player, not the game. I was wrong about Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like the video if you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Who's best girl? Tifa, Aerith, Jessie, or Barrett? I think it goes without saying which one my choice is. Take it easy, and as usual, have a good one.